Everyone, I must confess first, after pickleball and a healthy sport, it feels a little wrong to talk tobacco perhaps, but we're talking about global trade, right? And how is it that, the world right now can advance global trade and investment? Frederic, morning.
Good morning.
Okay. We're not going to talk kitchen and we're not going to talk pickles. But let me start off with, you man a vast region, right? You're talking about independent states from within the Commonwealth, Middle East, the Africa region. Tell me, how do countries with very different demographics, with very different policies, with very different people and boundaries, collaborate together to try and advance global trade?
Look, I think global trade has been challenged recently. I think there are commonalities in my company. We are operating in more than 150 countries, right? So I think many of us went through the challenges of COVID when we had to restructure the supply chain. Unfortunately, we had to go to some conflicts as well, which in our case, we had to focus always first on our employees, try to make sure that we keep them safe, sometimes relocate them. But also we try to manage our supply because there is a peculiarity in the tobacco sector. People want their products. And if supply chain is disrupted, this opens the door to what we call illicit trade, contraband, which on the one hand deprives the states from their finances, but also opens the financing of sometimes criminal rings, right? So these are the commonalities, I guess, with many of the people in the audience here. There is a peculiarity in the tobacco sector. People might believe we have trade across the world. What are the challenges for us? The number one challenge is regulation. And I'm not talking about regulation from what you would see as a sector which cigarettes is the norm. I want to talk about what the industry is going through across the world, a significant change. We started 20 years ago with a challenge, right? And we saw people are smoking. The challenge was, how could we, for the people who continue smoking or do not quit, could we come with a solution with products that they would adhere to, but at the same time might have the potential to reduce the risk? So we searched in many areas there, and we quickly understood that the main issue for when people smoke is the combustion. When you combust your product, this is the moment where you create thousands of substances, some of them cancerogenic, and we put all our research and innovation in trying to get rid of combustion. Took a long time. We piloted products, we put science behind it, because on the one hand, we needed product that people would accept. On the other hand, we had to prove that these products would reduce the toxicity, the exposure, and ultimately the risk to people. And after years of research, we hired 500 scientists from around the world. We were not used to that as a tobacco company. We built a very solid scientific package. We started launching our products 10 years ago now in several geographies in the world where we partner with the governments. And I'm glad to say that we sort of disrupted ourselves from the inside. We can see in certain countries that one day traditional cigarette smoking will not exist anymore. And I'm glad to report that in the last quarter, 40% of our net revenues were coming from these better alternatives. So it's a significant shift. I think it's a case study of a company that was very successful, but that is disrupting itself from the inside for the good of their users, for the good of public health. And hence, this is something totally new. Not easy for government to understand. It requires a scientific understanding. It requires changes in the regulation. We've seen very nice partnerships around the world in many countries. We are not yet there in India. We are engaging with the government, but I think we really would love to have a regulatory environment in India where we could bring these products to the people that are smoking here.
That's quite interesting. And you know, it's a very unique business, yours. It's not need and urgency based, it's addiction. That's what tobacco is, right? So tell me, I mean, let's talk about India. What are the challenges that you face? You did talk about regulation, but where do you see a market like India? And again, you know, your business per se, the one commonality across countries is addiction. If you're addicted to tobacco, you're addicted to tobacco. You know, we're talking about a growing India, per capita income is increasing, people are going ahead for premiumization, it's the top of the pyramid which is doing well. Does that impact your brand as well?
Look, I think first thing that we should mention is that people should not smoke.
Yes,
should not.
Feels very right.
That's what you would tell your families, your friends, right? Now, if they smoke, they should quit. But some people continue smoking and some people cannot quit. And I think with the product we've got around now, with the proof that these products are working, our duty is to bring new alternative products to the people who cannot quit. We've been doing that in several countries in the world.
Tell me
not
more
yet
about
in
these
India.
alternative products.
Sorry?
Tell me more about these alternative products.
So I was saying these are products that are not combusting. They can take the form of heated tobacco products. They can take the form of nicotine pouches. And the very interesting fact there is that we see good traction in many places. And we also see results. So I can give you a couple of examples. Before being in this position, I was president of Japan and then president of the European Union, right? In Japan, since the introduction of these products, alternatives, the total cigarette business, combustible cigarette business, has been halving. Half. In Europe, take a city in Italy like Rome. In Rome, a third of the smokers have switched to these alternatives. And a very interesting case study is the one of Sweden. The alternatives, these little pouches, were introduced like 30 years ago. If you look at the results now in Sweden, Sweden has the lowest smoking incidence in Europe, around 5%. Amongst 20 to 30, it's almost negligible. Look at the results now from a health perspective. When you look at the lung cancer amongst men, Sweden is the lowest level of lung cancer amongst men incidence in the European Union. So we've got proof, on the one hand, that these products can be accepted by smokers. It's a change of behaviors, but we've been investing $14 billion on our science, our research, but also on our commercial efforts to inform people about it. So it works across the world. These products are not yet available in India. We need to keep partnering with the government to make them available. But it's a major challenge. Sometimes people in the room would say, okay, smoking, this is tobacco, I know it. You know, there are more than 1 billion people smoking in the world. There are 300 million people using tobacco in India, 100 million smokers. So being capable for the ones who cannot quit to come with better alternatives where the toxicity is reduced by more than 90%, it is more than a business for us. It's a mission.
Quite interesting. You did talk about the numbers in India, right? Where is it that you see hurdles or regulatory challenges, if at all, when it comes to a market like India, because it's such a large, addressable base for a company like yours?
Look, we heard yesterday in all the panels and certainly in the speech of the Honorable Prime Minister that, first of all, the results are stellar, but there is a lot of work behind it, and we've heard the speed at which regulation has changed in many sectors. Talk about banking, energy, mobile phones. So speed is important, right? And when speed is there, investments comes, development comes. And as I was saying before, sometimes the tobacco sector is seen as an old sector, people smoke, not much can be done about it. As I mentioned before, we have the capability now to make drastic change in smokers' life, but also in public health overall. So today we still have a foreign direct investment ban in India. But with this new technology, with this new science that we could bring, not leaving the 300 million tobacco users in India behind, I think we could go to a Wixit Bayat also for the tobacco sector in India. And we would be more than willing to invest here once the appropriate regulatory framework would be in place. And as mentioned by the Prime Minister yesterday, in terms of public health and policies, Of course, India is a significant partner worldwide, but I think India could also shape this regulation worldwide, and that's what we are looking for.
But when a company such as yours decides to invest and get into a country, tell me what factors, what parameters actually sort of guide you to invest more in a country? And let's start off with the India example.
Look, first thing obviously is the domestic market, and it's not negligible in India, right? But it goes beyond the domestic market. I think in India, the moment we might be able to bring these products, we know that the workforce quality, the talents that we find here, that by the way we have in our company in India, but also many Indians outside India, is a key parameter. But it goes beyond that, because with the scale of India capabilities, we are sure that we can create economies of scales and innovation there, which would make India for us a hub for exports. And there is another peculiarity in our sector. This is all about the tobacco growers, right? Yeah. And in our case, India is one of the top tobacco growing country in the world. Sometimes it's not well known. We are partnering with all these growers with one thing in mind. We are implementing good agricultural practices with these people. And what we have in mind there is, first of all, help them to increase their productivity with the right equipment, the right technology. Second, try to minimize their own footprint in their communities. And the third one is to make sure that we ensure for these people, I would say, long-term sustainable revenue so that they can get the appropriate level of income for themselves and for their families. So that's very peculiar for our sector.
But tell me, Frederic, a lot of countries and companies and, investment bodies take ESG compliance very, very seriously. I mean, if you talk about a country, top that comes to my mind is perhaps Singapore. Does that act as a hindrance for you to do business in a country?
Look, we do business in many, many places, as
Yes.
I was saying before. But what matters to us is not so much the country. We want to put the consumer first. We've got alternatives for smokers that can drastically change their life at the end of the day. And I think our mission now is to make sure that these alternatives will be available. Now, some countries have partnered with the industry or with us for a long period of time. We have to recognize it's not easy. You come to a government like the government in India, you've seen the priorities, all the things that have to be done. And we are only one sector. But as I mentioned before, it matters for millions of people. So we will keep on partnering with the government, and we would be really looking forward to bring our innovation, our science, our investments, and our talents just for the sake of bringing these products to the Indian smokers.
Frederic, you do business across the world, and you gave very interesting data points about Japan and what's happening in Sweden. From your experience, what are some of the successful examples of trade agreements and alliances that Philip Morris has formed with countries?
As I was saying, there are several governments in the world that really embraced a policy of bringing better alternatives for smokers. Of course, it's not easy, as I was saying before, because it's not the cigarette of the past. This is scientifically driven type of products, which means that your counterpart needs to have the capability and the time and the investment to look at the science, look at the products, look at what happened outside, and build a regulatory framework for these products that is different from cigarettes. So there is quite of an action needed by the regulator to make these products available. And we've seen successes across the world, and we are partnering here in India, and we would be glad one day to see a regulatory framework for these products being implemented here.
But in your observation, considering, you've worked with a lot of developed economies, you've worked with emerging markets, you just talked about India as well, is there any difference in how countries behave, in the policies that they have, in the way that they do business when it comes to developed markets and emerging markets?
I wouldn't qualify and divide emerging markets with developed markets. At the end of the day, this is much more the willingness from a government to look at one significant issue they might face in their public health, which is people smoking, and then address it, right? And we see governments that have partnered, that have created regulatory frameworks for these products, and where we see traction both in the Western world and in the developing world. But sometimes, we looked at countries where the regulatory framework has been designed and where these products are available, and I mentioned the traction, right? Ironically, in the countries where these products are not available, what we see often is that the old cigarette, combustible cigarette market is still growing, right? Yeah. So it's not a divide between developed or non-developed or growing economies. It's much more the willingness for government to partner with the industry, look at the product, look at the science, build the appropriate regulatory framework so that we can inform people, and we will do the effort and the investment to convert them from burning their cigarettes to better alternatives. This is our job.
Right, interesting. I'm very curious to know, because you earlier talked about pandemic and how the challenges were during COVID. Now, for an addiction industry like yours, tell me how you maneuvered through that patch.
Through the pandemic, you mean?
Yes.
Look, I think it was not very different, I guess, from many people in the room here. I think we had to review our supply chain. Borders were closed. We had to review also the supply to our trade partners. And I have to say, not only in my company, we've seen that across the world, the resilience and the adaptability of our people and of the supply chain has been incredible. And actually, we did not face many disruptions overall. I think we were helped also by digital. I think it pushed many of our employees and trade partners to move even faster to digital. But overall, we experienced minimal disruption despite the storm we all went through.
Well, that's quite interesting to note, because everyone knew that you shouldn't be smoking. COVID was all about lungs. But yeah, an addiction is an addiction, right? Interesting. But I also wanted to talk about as to how in this very fast, dynamically evolving world with geopolitical tensions, trade tariffs, what Trump 2.0 is going to bring about, how do you see the tobacco industry actually moving forward? And do you see any challenges when it comes to your industry at large?
Look, as I was mentioning, I believe the tobacco industry now, as I explained, is in a significant transformation. Well, 10 years ago, people thought that cigarettes were there, they were there to stay. Now that we've seen that we can convert people from smoking to these better alternatives, we can really envisage, I mentioned Sweden before, smoking incidents 5%, negligible amongst 20 to 30 people. One might think that one day, and it could be tomorrow, we could see the end of the traditional cigarettes because of the advent of these alternatives, which is a significant change. It is historical, and I think the magnitude of this for public health is just immense. I was mentioning before, more than 1 billion people smoke in the world, so any intervention amongst this number of people would make the public health equation much, much better.
So as a company, what is the strategy for the next 5 years? To have people smoke more or smoke clean?
I think we've embarked on moving people away from cigarettes. The majority of our investments are going beyond these alternatives, and we are focused on keeping on delivering on this. As I was mentioning, very few companies have disrupted themselves from the inside as we did. Very few companies have created products that compete with their historical products and that generate, after 10 years, 40% of their net revenues. And our goal is to keep going and one day be 100% in alternatives and leave the cigarette behind. Create a smoke-free world.
I want to know more about alternatives, and I'm sure everyone here would also want to know. I mean, we all know cigarettes are harmful and one shouldn't be smoking. But is there no nicotine in alternatives? How do they work?
No, there are nicotine in alternatives. Actually, nicotine is not a cancerogenic element. Nicotine is not the main cause of harm in smoking. As I was mentioning before, the issue with smoking is that you burn tobacco. When you burn tobacco, it's like a barbecue. you create more than 6,000 substances. Some of them are cancerogenic. So the idea was to get your nicotine, to get your flavor, do you really need to burn something? Or could you get this through alternatives that would be non-burning? And that was the entire challenge we've been facing. We had put a lot of research to get there, because on the one hand, you need to come with a product that you can prove scientifically is reducing toxicity by more than 90%, and therefore reduce the potential risk of individual users. But on the other hand, these products need to be acceptable by smokers. And I think we struck that balance after, as I was saying, lots of years of research, piloting, failure. And 10 years ago, when we tried some of the products that are in the marketplace now, I could see the light. And the light was first inside the company, when some smokers in the company completely switched to these products. And then we said, we tried, we piloted, some of these products were not yet ready for being marketed. Now, if some of our employees are switching totally to these products, we've got something that would work for consumers. And we had to transform the company totally, because we were a traditional tobacco company, and here you're asking people to change behavior. You need to be able to communicate to smokers and say, leave this habit. What is the alternative there? Explain the science. Make sure that they would have their satisfaction in the product. Create the appropriate route to market for this product. Sometimes it involves electronics, things we didn't know. Interact with them digitally. We were not doing that. So we had to rebuild the company from the inside to sell products that are totally different from the traditional one we were selling before.
Frederic, you must be having such interesting data now about all the countries and all their, sort of tobacco consuming and non-tobacco consuming market. You did talk about Sweden, which may go net neutral, hopefully soon. Tell me, what are some of the interesting findings and all the data that you have across geographies with you?
Can you come again? I didn't hear.
No, what I wanted to know is, you know so many patterns about countries, about, the demographics, smokers, non-smokers, clean smokers, if that's the correct terminology, I don't know. What are some of the interesting observations that you found in all the data that you've gathered across countries?
Look, I think smokers are using their products, and there are commonalities across the world, right? Yeah. And the commonality we mentioned, we created alternatives that would satisfy people, that would be scientifically proven. And if they work with smokers in one place, very often they would work with a smoker in another place. So the product side of things has been totally looked after. Now, we have to adapt our strategy market by market, right? The first one I mentioned is get the appropriate regulatory framework in your market. If you cannot communicate with smokers about these products, it's very hard to make them change their behavior. Smokers use their products 10 times per day. They are used to it. To convince them to let them try, you need a certain parameter in your regulatory framework to allow for that, right? So that's one very important part of the equation. Now, of course, we need then to adapt to the regulatory environment, but also the route to market has to be different. The messaging has to be different. The way you approach trade has to be different. And it's also varying not from one country to another. We know there are many Indias in India, right? Yeah. So the way you will talk to someone in the southern part of India vis-à-vis Delhi has to be adapted. But look, we've got teams there. We are multinational, but we are made out of people that are in their communities. They know their consumers, they know their trade partners, and they can craft the best messages and the best approach to deliver these alternatives to smokers.
So before we wind down, I want to know, are people smoking more, or are they smoking less than, say, 1 year back, or let's say since pandemic?
It very depends on the country. Yeah. In the country and countries where these alternative products have been launched, people are smoking less. I mentioned cigarette business in Japan halved since we introduced these products. But conversely, in countries that have not yet created the appropriate framework for these products to be available for people, sometimes we even see an increase in the total cigarette volume in these markets. And that's why our mission there is to partner with the governments, make sure they look at our science, and make sure they build a sustainable regulatory framework so that we can offer these products to the 300 million, certainly in India, tobacco users and the more than 1 billion in the world.
Well, I hope you get to a partnership with the Indian government soon and we see more alternatives here in India. Thank you so much, Frederic.
Welcome.
Pleasure
Thank you.
speaking with you. Thank you.